the government can't control Bitcoin, then I think it's our best shot at taking money away from the state, right? And as you and I know very well, if you fix the money, if you separate money from state from money, you solve 70% of the world's not just economic but even social problems as well.
Bible and Bitcoin podcast is sponsored by Bitcoin Well. Bitcoin Well is a Bitcoin-only exchange. It's non-custodial, so you don't have to trust them with your Bitcoin. It's feature-rich and always improving. They have a Christian CEO and are an all-around amazing place to get your Bitcoin. To get started, go to bitcoinwell.com/pastorcoin and start stacking today. Welcome to the Bible and Bitcoin podcast. I'm your host, Alin Armstrong, aka Pastor Coin, and I'm excited for today's episode because I have a precious brother in the Lord with me, Econ Bro. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Pastor Coin, for having me.
Awesome. Now, some of you guys don't know, this is our, I think, fourth attempt at doing this, but Lord willing, this is the going to be the successful one. So that's probably why he was smirking and why I'm smirking, because we've tried this so many times. Econ Bro, tell us a little bit about your journey to the Lord. I always like to ask that question first so that the audience can get a feeling for where you are.
Sorry, could you say that again? The network sort of...
Yeah.
I didn't hear much of what you said.
No problem. Tell us a little bit about your journey to Jesus Christ, to coming to the Lord.
Okay, so I was born into a regular Christian family. My mother was Catholic, my father was Methodist, but of course my mother followed my father to the Methodist church. We were conventional social Christians. You know, church was just another social gathering, just like my dad belonged to a golf club. So church was just another club. You know, it was that's just how it was. We weren't particularly religious people. But we grew up learning the Bible, and we would pray every now and then, and so on. But I never really took it serious. None of us did, really. So I'm going to cut a rather long story short. In 2009, after I traveled to 2 states in my country to sow my wild oats, I returned from from the last journey, and then my mother was, when I returned home, my mother was listening to a Christian teaching. By this time, my family had gotten a little more religious. There was tragedy in the family. So, as I said, I'm skipping over a whole lot. So there was some tragedy in the family, and my mother drew closer to God. And then, so I returned home one day after a long journey. I think well over a month I was away from home, and I saw my mother watching a teaching from a popular preacher here in Nigeria, and I was very moved by the things I heard, and I wanted to hear more. So growing up in an Orthodox church, those churches used to be, as a kid, they used to be very boring to me. I didn't get all the standing up and kneeling and burning incense, and I didn't get all that stuff. So it was really, really tiring. So for the first time, I heard someone, or maybe not the first time, but for the first time, I actually listened to what a preacher was saying, and I was very intrigued by things I heard. And interestingly, he was talking about being calm, taking stock of your life and that kind of stuff. So I was interested, and then I said to my mother, I'm going to go to church with you the next time. And she was like, great, we have service, I think tomorrow or the day after. And I was like, wonderful. And then I followed her and to the church, and then the pastor preached, and I gave my life to Christ. That was basically the story of my conversion. There is a lot that happened I went through a phase where I lost my faith, where I went through a questioning phase where I considered myself agnostic. I went through an atheist phase. There was even a time that I looked very, very extensively into the religion of Islam because I was curious. A friend confronted me in 2013 or 14. I'm foggy on the details on the year. So a friend confronted me, a Muslim friend, and then he asked me why I was a Christian. And I was very, very well versed in Christianity, at least not as well versed as I am now, but I understood a lot about Christianity at this time. I had begun doing apologetics, and eventually, so this friend confronted me, and then very interesting. The friend who challenged me, the Muslim friend, I reached out to him the day after he gave me the Quran and asked him, what does this word mean? Because I didn't understand. It was an English version, but they still have Arabic transliterations there. So I asked him, what does this word mean? He was like, where did you see that? So I told him what chapter of the Quran I was in, and he was like, wow, even he hasn't gotten that far, interestingly, you know. And it's a small book, you know, relative compared to the Bible, it's a small book. So I was able to be done with it in, I think, 2 or 3 days. I was done with it, and I've read it many, many, many times since. Needless to say, it wasn't for me. So I still remained in my Christianity, and it even helped me to be stronger in my faith. So, as I said, I've been through that questioning phase. I've been through, when I was studying Islam, I was genuinely questioning. I didn't do that thing where I came in as a Christian trying to criticize. I said a prayer. I said, Almighty God, I don't know if you are Yahweh or you are Allah or you are, I don't know. Right? I was like, if you are in this book, reveal yourself to me. Yeah. Like I kept an open mind. I was very sober. I wasn't reading to criticize. I was reading to understand. And then I'm still where I am now. I'm still a Christian. So yeah, that's pretty much the summary. A lot of things have happened since that time and now, but yeah, that's the summary.
Yeah, so I've been following you on Twitter for a little bit, and we've talked for a little bit as well. And you are very knowledgeable in the scriptures and in the Bible. And you are. Would you identify yourself as ANCAP?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Although I've been told not to use that term, I've been advised by many people not to use the term because it's off-putting. When you talk about being an anarcho-capitalist, when you talk about being an anarchist,
Yes.
people don't like the term. So I'm learning to use voluntarist as a label. It's not sticking, but I'm trying to use voluntarist. Recently, I came across a very interesting libertarian figure. He goes by the name of Mark Victor. He's a lawyer in the United States, brilliant man, and he has this movement called the Live and Let Live movement, which is basically what anarchism is, which is what libertarianism is, live and let live. So I like that label. So I don't know, maybe I'm a live and let liver if there is any such word. But yeah, ANCAP is
so that's
perfectly fine.
you're knowledgeable in the scriptures. You're an anarcho-capitalist, or you don't want to say it that way, but it is what it is. How do you reconcile those two things? Because some would argue Christianity is not an anarcho-capitalist, or the Bible's not an anarcho-capitalist book, but yet you hold to this position. How do you reconcile those two beliefs?
Okay, so I thought Christianity was incompatible with anarcho-capitalism, but I eventually got to find out. So it has been in front of it, which I wrote an article about, talks about the about Israel asking God for a king, and God said, and I have an article written about this, by the way. God said in that chapter 8 that Israel, in asking for a king, was rejecting him. So God wanted to be their king. Now, I would like to state that a state in itself isn't necessarily evil. The state isn't evil. The problem with the state, with the authority, is that it's made up of imperfect men. It's made up of imperfect men, which is actually a theme in the Bible. Man is incapable of ruling other men, right? Man in our fallen state, as we are incapable of ruling other men. So the best of men in scriptures, Job, David, Abraham, they are still men. We are all imperfect. So when Jesus Christ returns in glory and he reigns over the nations, he reigns over the earth, because he's the perfect man, he can. I mean, imagine Jesus wouldn't have any problem with the economic calculation. People say in order to for socialism to work, they need to be able to solve the economic calculation problem, right? You need to be able to anticipate consumer demand that changes literally every second, right? But Jesus, the Son of God, is omniscient, obviously. So Jesus is the ultimate. He's omniscient, right? He's omnipotent, and then in the age to come, there is no scarcity, right? So everything is so the problems that we have with government, that we have with the state, don't apply in the age to come. They don't apply to Jesus. Sir, I've gone off on a tangent. Basically, yes, the scriptures do not, or rather, anarcho-capitalism isn't counter to scripture. So here is how I interpret it. How do we reconcile the scriptures saying we should have respect for authority, respect the government? I see it the same way. The same principle Paul applies when he talks about slavery. He says, if one is a slave, he is a freedman in Christ, and the man who is free is a slave of Christ. So he says, if a man is a slave, if the man can get his freedom, he should get his freedom. But he shouldn't say because he's a freedman in Christ, then he's not going to be any man. That would be stupid. That's impractical. That could probably get him killed. So I see the same principle applies. If we can get our freedom from the state, that's fine. After all, the state is a rejection of God in itself. It's 1 Samuel 8. I wrote an article about this, and you can I could send you the link. You can put it in the description. It's a Substack article, no paywall. You can read it for free. Where I explain how statism is actually not just a rejection of God, but it's actually satanic in its origin. So I sort of break it down there. So Paul says, if you can get your freedom, get your freedom. So if we can achieve anarcho-capitalism, do so. But while we are under the state, we should obey the laws. We should pay our taxes. We should do all that stuff. But if you can get your freedom from the state, of course, without using unchristian methods. I, for one, don't believe in protesting. I believe it's counter to Christianity to protest. A lot of people disagree with this, but I don't think if it was proper to protest, then Jesus would have protested, then the apostles would have protested. But people in the Bible never protested the government. They would criticize when the government does something bad if what the government does is counter to the law of God, right? Which is pretty much what the prophets did. But yeah, and of course they will talk about injustices and all that, but they never went out to protest against government or anything of the sort. So I think that's wrong. Obviously, I think it's wrong to be violent, to try and violently overthrow the state. So if we can use other subversive means by educating the people, by talking to people about the ills of the state, and then using the democratic process to get rid of the state, I can't guarantee that it will be successful. But if we can't do that, then yes, we should. So I don't see any contradictions there.
So the way I see it is like most of us live in democracies, so-called. And if we can use those means within that system to bring change to the system, I don't understand why we would not. And we have the tools set before us to do that sort of thing and to end the state or taxation or unjust monetary policy or whatever. And some would argue, well, you can't really fix it from within. But and what would you say to that? So somebody that would say you can't fix a broken system with a broken system.
Well, I tend to agree, but not for the reasons most people give. So my own reason is biblical. In 1 Samuel 8, when Israel asked for a state, God said something rather ominous. He said, "You would come to me and ask for relief, and I will not answer you." Right. So that's what he said to Israel. And in the article I wrote, I explained how the establishment of the state was as a result of the spiritual powers over the nations. They were the ones who pushed the people to ask for an earthly king. They were the ones who pushed the people to reject God as king, to ask for a state. So, so when Israel does the same and rejects God, God tells them, God basically tells them, you would regret this, and I will not answer you when you call out to me to help you for this, right? So that sort of makes me feel like it's futile to want to try and overturn the state, whether by democratic means or whatever. So regardless of what means. So, however, I've noticed something with scripture. The Bible is hardly ever entirely absolute in any of its claims. There's always some loophole. There's always some possibility that some chance of relief. God always leaves it open. So let me give an example of the principle. In scriptures, in the book of Daniel, the Bible tells us that the entire earth was given to King Nebuchadnezzar, right? Animals, everything was subject to him, all the nations. But we know historically, and even those who wrote the scriptures, they knew it. Nebuchadnezzar wasn't literally king of all the earth, right? He didn't rule over literally everywhere on earth. Even though spiritually he was given the authority, and if he had the time if he lived long enough to go on military campaigns, Nebuchadnezzar would have succeeded in becoming king of the whole earth. So that's how the Bible does things. Even though it says Nebuchadnezzar is king of the whole earth, he's not literally king of the whole earth. So in the same way, the same principle sort of applies. Even though God makes an absolute statement that this can't be undone, it doesn't mean there isn't room for it doesn't mean it's absolutely impossible for it to happen. So I don't know if you get,
Right.
maybe
Yeah.
that's not the right analogy, but I don't know if you get the idea.
Yeah. So let me give you a scripture and maybe you can expound on it. So when Jesus says, "All authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations." The way I've read that and do read that is that he's sending us out into the world to disciple nations to obey everything he said. So I don't know how you would articulate that. Is he asking us to make Christian nations or to Christianize the nations? So in that way, it seems to me like Jesus' mission and our mission from him is to actually reverse that poor decision in 1 Samuel 8 and to teach the nations about Jesus Christ, to obey him, and to put God as their king again.
Yes, I agree with that interpretation, but we might disagree on how that's going to happen. So we might. I don't know what your thoughts are on it. So when Jesus says to go preach to the nations, the book of Revelation tells us how that unfolds, how that's going to happen. So it tells us that disciples will be made among every people. So every language, every tongue, every tribe, every nation, every people. So languages, peoples, nations, tribes need to have, I would say, at least one representative. So Jesus isn't looking for God isn't looking for literally every nation to, everyone from every tribe and every tongue to turn to him. All he's looking for is representatives. And this could lead into something else, but I'll try not to go there. So all God is looking for is representatives, people from every tribe and every tongue. And when that happens, when true disciples are raised among every people, it doesn't have to be literally every human being, then Jesus will return. And in his return will put an end to this current system. So I don't think we will achieve this system and bring Jesus. I think it's Jesus's return that will accomplish his reign. So I don't know if that answers.
Yeah. Do you think that it's theoretically possible to have Christian nations that have God as the chief supreme king over them? Is that theoretically possible now, or do you think that's not possible?
No, it's not possible, except in the coming age. The Bible literally tells us it's going to get worse from now to Jesus' return. So, by the way, there's no such thing as a Christian nation. No matter. So I used to say America is God's own country because I drank the Kool-Aid when I was a conservative. So I used to say America is God's own country. I don't believe that anymore now that I understand the scriptures.
I wrote The Bible and Bitcoin for You, Bible-believing Christian, and in it I lay out the biblical basis for what money is, why our current fiat monetary system is ungodly, and how Bitcoin is the best and most viable, biblically compliant replacement for government fiat money. There's even a small group study guide in the back with additional resources to study with your church small group. Get it on Amazon or pay with Bitcoin at thebibleandbitcoin.com for a discount.
So in Deuteronomy 32, the Bible tells the story of the gospel from the beginning to the return of Christ. It's more interesting if you read it from the Septuagint, but it basically tells the story of the beginning of the age to the end of the age, where Jesus will judge the nation. So in verses 8 and 9, something very interesting is said. It tells the story of how when God divided the nations, when he gave the nations their inheritance, he divided them and placed spiritual powers in charge of all the nations. Now we could go into a lot of talk about translations and how, because it actually says, if you read the text that we copied from the Masoretic text, the Bible's copied from the Masoretic text, the KJV, the NIV, and they say in verse 38 that he divided, in verse 8 rather of chapter 32 of Deuteronomy, it says, when he divided the nations, he divided them according to the number of the sons of Israel. Some other versions say according to the number of sons of God. If you read it in various translations, you get different meaning, but they all mean the same thing. They literally all mean the same thing. I don't want to go into that right now. Maybe we can have another episode sometime in the future and talk about that and break that down.
Just so you know, I follow the Sons of God reading and reject the Sons of Israel, because the Sons of Israel reading to me makes no sense. Why would he divide the nations according to the Sons of Israel? It doesn't make sense.
Okay, so I think they're both correct. It's just that the Sons of Israel sort of hides the message. I agree with the Sons of God interpretation. I believe that's actually more correct. But the Sons of Israel, so God did a miraculous thing with the scriptures. If you read those, like the Septuagint against the Masoretic text, they have different readings. Somehow, they all tend to say the same thing at the end. So, and after this, I'll give another example. In Deuteronomy 32:8, it says they were divided according to the number of the sons of Israel, right? Which makes absolutely no sense if you think about it. But if you find out how many of Israel's sons got into Egypt in the time of Joseph, you count, depends on how you count them. You can count 70 or 72.
That's true, yeah.
And then if you go to the division of the nations, in Genesis 10 and 11, when you count the nations in Genesis 10, I believe, you have the same 70 or 72 nations. So basically, in Deuteronomy 32, verse 8, whether you're reading it as sons of God or sons of Israel, the Bible says he divided them according to the number. So the number is 70 or 72, depending on how you're counting it.
That's right.
So what the Masoretic text does, the Sons of Israel translation does, is that it hides the extra information, even though it doesn't hide it well enough, because in the very next verse, verse 9, it says, "But Yahweh chose Israel as his possession." So it doesn't really flow. You're asking yourself, what's the connection, right? But to those who, I mean, even before knowing of the Sons of God translations, I could actually see that, right? That if God is dividing the nations and then he's taking one for himself, then that means he must have given the other nations to some other people, or at least some other person or people.
Yeah.
Right. So, so another example of this kind of thing, the Masoretic text says, "My ear hast thou pierced," and then the Septuagint says, "A body hast thou prepared for me." Or I may be getting it wrong, but one says, "My ear hast thou pierced," another says, "A body hast thou prepared for me." So people love to jump, skeptics, people from other religions, and say, "Look, contradictions." They are literally saying the same thing, right? Because and it's weird how that happens, where you have two different readings and they're actually saying the same thing. Yeah. So there is a law in Exodus 22 or 23, I can't remember, that says if a man buys a Hebrew servant, the Hebrew servant is to serve him for a Hebrew slave. The Hebrew slave is to serve him for 6 years, and on the 7th year is to set the slave free. But if the slave wants and says, "I love my master, I love my wife, and I love my children," now this is assuming that the master gave a wife to him and he has children with the wife, then the scripture says he would take, if the man says he wants to stay with his master, his master would take him to the gates, the elders of the city, and his ear will be pierced with an awl, and he becomes bound to the man for life, right? So that's a principle in the law of Moses. Now, "My ear has thou pierced" refers to you becoming a slave. It refers to your body becoming permanently a property of your master, which is what slavery is. The person owns your body, the fruit of your body, which is your labor, right? And then when the Septuagint says a body, now, so speaking of Christ, "My ear has thou pierced" refers to him becoming God's born servant. He was literally pierced in his side. His flesh was pierced. And when his body was pierced, that was Jesus Christ getting into agreement with God, saying, "I am bound to you for all eternity, forever and ever. I will be your servant, your slave forever. And of course, me and the people you have given to me, my children, the Christians, Israel and Christians." So "my ear has thou pierced," and then a body has thou. Sorry, I'm all over the place. "My body has thou." I wasn't expecting this. Otherwise, I would have prepared to explain it more, to be more coherent. So "a body has thou prepared for me." Jesus couldn't offer. He couldn't sacrifice himself. He couldn't bind himself to God without God piercing him. So God preparing an earthly body for him is the same thing. I don't know if you get the point I'm making. It literally says the same thing. Whether it says you prepare a body for me, a body for what? A body so that I can do your will. What is the will? Of course, bringing us to Jesus and bringing us to the Father, and of course, binding us and himself to the Father for all eternity, which is done by the act of piercing the body. By the way, the principle also applies in marriage. The principle of piercing. When a man pierces a woman, right? When he, of course, we know what that means. When he pierces a woman, she becomes his property for life. So that's why a marriage, when it's consummated, man and wife are bound to each other forever. The same principle actually applies to when a man sows into the ground, right? If a man tills the ground, he breaks the soil and puts his seed. The fruit of the ground, of the earth, his labor, the fruit of his labor is his. So I tweeted something a couple of days ago when it just occurred to me that this same principle applies to, so this is basically homesteading, right? If you apply your labor, to the earth, you pierce the earth, in this case agriculture, you pierce the earth and put in seed, then the fruit belongs to you. So again, this is just more proof that the libertarian anarchist principle is actually not incompatible with the Bible. So homesteading, which anarchists advocate, is actually biblical. So that's a very, very long tangent, but I hope.
So
I'm okay.
No, I was going to say you believe like I do. I was just recently reading about this. Where do property rights come from? All right, I believe in property rights. I know you believe in property rights. Where do they come from? And as I was reading the scripture, okay, we're made in God's image. He told us to go and have dominion of all the earth. He gave it to us to subdue it, to tend it, to make it fruitful. And I think it is as simple as you just said. When you go out and you work a piece of land or you put effort into a property, it is yours by divine right.
Yeah.
And you can gift that to another. You could sell that to another. You could do whatever you want with it. It's yours. And I believe that's where the property rights. That's how the Bible describes property rights. Is that what you would say too?
I agree 100%. God gave the earth to man. So Rothbard makes his argument. I believe a lot of Nozick, David Friedman, a lot of people make argument about natural rights and all that kind of stuff. But I agree with their argument, but I believe that the ultimate source of property rights is from God. As a Christian, I can't help but believe otherwise, because God gave us, the earth is his property, right? And then he says to man, have dominion, take this, it is yours. He also says, fill the earth, right? So as men multiply and they go from one place to another, they fill the earth. Whatever place you touch, whatever place you mix your efforts with, becomes yours. God, so when the nations were divided, when the men scattered, wherever they went to became their land, right? So I believe God is the source of property rights. I agree 100% with you on that.
So when men reject God and put a man over them, would you say that they've, in a sense, forfeited that right because of that decision? Or, well, I mean, when you choose, sure, but when someone's tyrannical and comes in and conquers your property and stuff like that, then you're a victim in that case. So how would you understand the state essentially ruling over everyone's property in light of the fact that they don't really have that right? Or do they have that right?
So even before you asked the question, I was thinking about it. So it's not something I've thought through. However, here are some related thoughts. I believe the state is a very big hindrance to the fill the earth command. Right. So I'm going to get a little more biblical again, so please just bear with me. So in Genesis chapter 3, something very interesting happens. So God gives the earth to mankind, and he gives the earth to Adam and obviously his sons. And he says, fill the earth, occupy. He meant that when he said fill the earth. And then God says to Adam, the day you eat of that tree, the day you disobey me, you will die. And then so God says you will die. So I've heard a lot of people say Adam handed his authority to Satan, and when he obeyed Satan. And then they use Paul's words in Romans when Paul says, the one you obey is your master. So I do agree with that. But then would Adam obeying Jesus, obeying God, not automatically give the earth back to God. So I don't agree with the principle applying to how Satan became God of this world. So here's what I know happened there. When I'm using it. I'm going to use this to try to answer what you asked, at least to the best of my ability. As I said, I haven't exactly thought it out. Well, here's what I do know. So here's how Satan became the God of the earth. When God says you will surely die, there is an God is not going to come down himself and stab Adam and Eve in the chest for disobeying, right? So in Psalm 103, I think I can't remember. I think maybe verse 10 and 11. It could be 103 or 105, 10 and 11. I'll find the verse and I'll text it to you. It basically says, and I'm paraphrasing, that when God gives a command, his messengers go out to perform it. So he doesn't go out himself. So when God says, if you eat of this, you will surely die. And then when Adam eats of it, God doesn't come down to kill him, right? So there is a messenger who will carry out the curse, who will carry out the death, right? So, and Hebrews chapter 2 verse 14 tells us that Satan is the one who holds the power of death, right? So Satan is the messenger who will carry out death. And then when God comes to Adam and says, who told you were naked? And then God pronounces the curse on Adam. So God is not saying something different from what he told Adam when he said death. The simplistic man would think death literally means just dying. But basically, when God said you will die, death is not just the physical death, it is the process that leads to death, which is what the Bible calls decay, corruption. Right? So when God says you will die, it is a process that begins with corruption, that it's a process of corruption that eventually leads to death. So God then begins to curse. He curses the serpent and all the animals. Right? He says, "Curse is the serpent above all the animals." So all the animals are cursed, but the serpent is cursed above all of them. He curses the woman, and then to the man, he curses the man's flesh. He curses the man's body. He says, curse are you, through the sweat of your brow will you eat food, the ground will produce thorns and thistles for you, and so on. He says till you return to the earth, to the dust from where you were taken, for dust you are and dust you will return. So he didn't say dust you were. But God says to Adam, a man of flesh, he says to him, dust you are. So Adam is currently dust, was dust at the time, even though he had flesh. So basically, when God says Adam is dust, whatever he says to Adam, he says to the ground, he says to the dust, the earth itself. So when God curses Adam, he's cursing the entire creation, because the creation is of the same substance, ground, dust. The word Adam is gotten from the Hebrew word Adama, which means ground. Dam means blood, which is something that is in man's body. So when God curses Adam, he's not just cursing Adam, he's cursing the ground. He said, curse is the ground for your sake.
Yeah, that's a good
Curse
insight.
is the ground because of you. So everything on the earth is cursed. And because Satan is the messenger who carries out death, he's the one who goes out. The ground is cursed. So Satan goes to carry out the curse. That is how Satan is the God of this world. That's why he has access to everything on the earth, to all the elements of the earth. That's why he has access to our body. So what God says to Adam, when he says the ground will produce thorns and thistles for you, our bodies will also produce thorns and thistles, cancer, pimples, COVID, eczema, measles, all kinds of sicknesses, right? When you want to do something, God says, through the sweat of your brow will you accomplish anything. So in order to survive, to eat, you have to toil. It's very laborious. Now that also applies to our physical bodies, because God cursed the ground, and he says our bodies are still ground. So when God says, out of the sweat of your brow will you eat food, if I say this when I'm teaching people in church, if you want to sit down and watch a movie or do something pleasurable, it's very easy. But the moment you want to do something, anything that would improve your life, it becomes very boring. It's difficult to sit down and listen to a teaching, a preaching. It's difficult to sit down and learn in class, because that's the curse at work. It's actually not supposed to be like that, but it's because the ground, your body is still the ground, remember, is supposed to make you suffer. Anyway, so sorry about that long tangent. So it's not a tangent, it's leading up to the point. So when God says all of these things, he says, so he said to man before this, fill the earth, right? So in God telling Adam to fill the earth, he knew that Satan was going to come in and corrupt the earth. So he literally needs man to of course, he needs man to literally fill the earth. That doesn't mean man will fill every square inch of the earth, but men have to be everywhere on the earth. Men have to own everywhere on the earth, because the literal ground is cursed. The water is cursed. So when God has disciples in every nation, every tribe, everywhere, men have filled the earth. His men have filled the earth. Then Satan has this is tempting me to talk about the atonement as I understand it. I'll skip over that. We can have that discussion another time. So basically, when man fills the earth, when Christ man, Jesus's body, godly men fill the earth, then we can claim it back from Satan when we fill the earth. So how does the state factor into all this? The state as it stands actually prevents people from filling the earth. The state makes it so if I need to buy land if I want to fill the earth, right? When there's literally, so I live in a remote area, so to speak. There's land as far as the eyes can see behind my home, where I could just go there and start to fill the earth, right? And fill the earth. But I can't do that because the state will come and shoot me. So in that sense, the state sort of limits it limits us from fulfilling the will of God. So that's how my tithing.
Yeah, absolutely. I was talking with my wife today about property taxes and just how immoral that whole idea is, that a governing body, a state, can come and literally tax your property. You don't own it at that point. It's theirs, and you're their slaves, and there's no two ways about it. So yeah, I've never really thought of it that way, but you're right. I think you're right that the state is one of the greatest hindrance of humanity flourishing as much as it could. And that leads me to my next question. Obviously, this is called the Bible and Bitcoin podcast. So I want to ask you about Bitcoin and how you think, or if you think, Bitcoin as a technology, what it is, what it does, what it claims to do, if this will have an impact moving forward on freedom in the world, not just in individual nations, just all around the world, freedom for all humanity. Is Bitcoin going to have a substantial impact, or is it just going to always be a thing that's available, but not really going to have a global impact?
I honestly don't. I don't know. If I'm going to judge by the growth of Bitcoin, I mean, Bitcoin is what 14, 15 years old.
Yeah, and it's pretty young still.
Yeah, and it has consumed much of the world. I mean that in a good way, right? So, if I'm going to judge based on that, I would say the future of Bitcoin is bright. I think it only gets better. However, things have been known to, and the parable of the sower. A sower goes out to sow seed, and then seed was sown on ground, and then the seed sprang up immediately because it didn't have depth, and then it died immediately, right after the sun scorched it. So Bitcoin, I could also say from a biblical perspective, Bitcoin grew very fast. So I'm not saying this is what's going to happen. I'm just saying these are the possibilities. So I really don't know. It could be that Bitcoin has a very swift rise, and then it gets to its peak, and then it starts to fall, or it could just continue and then consume the world. So I don't know how it is. However, now I'm going to leave aside the argument of, Roger Ver wrote this book, Hijacking Bitcoin, and I haven't read it yet, but I know what the book is about. And there are people who talk about the problems of Bitcoin, and I don't I don't disagree with them. I don't disagree with them entirely. But so I'm not going to comment on that. I'm just going to talk about whether or not I think Bitcoin is a force for good in the world. I do believe it is a force for good in the world. If those who make the claim that Bitcoin is hijacked by the government, if those who make that claim are incorrect, then Bitcoin is indeed a force for good. Because if the government cannot control it, if the government can't control Bitcoin, then I think it's our best shot at taking money away from the state, right? And as you and I know very well, if you fix the money, if you separate money from state from money, you've solved 70% of the world's not just economic but even social problems as well.
Yeah.
So yes, Bitcoin is a force for good. Unless the state can get its hands on it, it's a force for good. So that's as much as I can say on that now.
All right, yeah. So tell us a little bit about what you think about. You mentioned society, like if the government can't get its hands on it, then it can also solve societal issues. How do you view money and moral issues? Do you see a connection there?
Mm.
When the money's debased, are the morals debased? Are they connected, or are these just? Is it just a coincidence that it seems that bad money equals bad morals?
So I don't think it's a coincidence. This is one of the things. Interestingly, I haven't written anything about it, but in the seminars I host, I talk about it a lot. I tweet about it. I talk to my students about it. As we say, fix the money, fix the people. I believe money has. I mean, the Bible literally says the love of money is the root of all evil. So if money, something that we see as an economic thing, an economic good, an economic phenomenon, the Bible says it has the power to bring about great evil. The people love it. So, I mean, as Christians, there is no question about that. There are those who like to pretend like there is no ethics to economics or no morality to economics or to money, or any of those things. I think those people are very, very deluded. Professor Jörg Guido Holzmann of the Mises Institute was the one who put me onto this. I saw a video he did many, many years ago when he was talking about his book, The Ethics of Money Production, and then I read the book, and then it just clicked. I got inklings when I was reading Rothbard's What Has Government Done to Our Money, but then it wasn't formed until I read Professor Holzmann's books. And by the way, there's this student of his, a great friend of mine, Professor Jeffrey Degner, also of the Mises Institute, and I think he's the Dean of Business, Faculty of Business at the Cornerstone University. Yes. He also wrote a brilliant dissertation. I don't think he has made it public yet, so I can't talk about it. He also wrote a brilliant paper on the effects that money, fiat currency, has on families. It's brilliant, very, very great stuff. So the money does affect the people, and there are fewer places that explain this better than the society in which I live. So we've had very terrible inflation in the past couple of years. So things were inflation was growing at a relatively steady rate until 2021 rather, when the government decided to ramp up the money printing. So that was when we had a spike in M2, in the money supply as a whole. And then when that happened, actually started in 2020, but then the money found its way through the economy in 2021, and then we started to see a rise in vices. Now we've always had prostitution and robberies and kidnapping. Nigeria is far from a perfect society, but those things were dialed to 11 when the inflation started to hit. So when the money had circulated and things got very, very expensive, things started, so prices literally doubled overnight, right? Everyone was like, what's going on, right? Prices literally doubled overnight in 2021. So when that happened, kidnappings kidnappings increased in 2021. When so Nigeria, there are lots of kidnappings, right? People are kidnapped literally almost every day. I have a friend whose father was kidnapped for ransom, so it happens all the time. No one can travel by road anymore here unless excuse me. So there's a popular saying here that if you want to travel by road, now people say it as a joke, but it's actually true. If you want to travel by road, it actually costs more, not because it's more expensive, but because you have to save up money for ransom. So if one has to travel by road, the person has to save up. The person's family has to hold on to ransom money. So it's terrible. By the way, this is part of why it's more expensive to host my events when I have to travel, because before I would just travel by road and I would go where I want to go. It's cheap, so I only have to think about other expenses. But now, travel is almost 20% of, maybe even 30% of my cost, because I have to fly now, and it's more expensive to fly because the demand is much, and then there's inflation as well. So there are kidnappings, there are prostitution is on the increase, all kinds of vices, all kinds of evil, and then we have ritual killings here. We have this thing where people go to some witch doctor, and then the witch doctor tells them, if you bring a virgin, or you bring the eyes of a child, or the tongue, or the insert body part of some person, you would they will sacrifice it to some deity, some devil, and then you would get money. And people are literally doing this. People are doing this. Now, we've always had these things, right? But in the 90s, the late 90s, it sort of died down. We didn't hear anything about it again. And then in 2021, it made a frightening resurgence. And because we have the internet now, we've always had the internet. We've had the internet since 2000, and we've always had internet, but good internet since about 2006. So it's not like these things were happening, but not as much as they're happening now. So now there are videos of people making feces sandwiches, like they defecate, they excrete into a loaf of bread and eat it because some witch doctor told them if they do that they will make money. And then you have people recording them from a distance. You have people murdering children, and children murdering their friends. So quick story. Where I live, not too far from where I live, maybe a couple of kilometers away. For Americans, that's a couple of miles for you guys. I know Canadians use kilometers, if I'm not mistaken. So a couple of kilometers away from where I live, there is a hotel, and so there was some rockers at the hotel, and the security came, and so there was a young man who was invited for drinks with his friends. So they went out to drink, and then all of a sudden he started to feel sleepy. So they took him up to the room, and God saved him because he woke up and he found his friends. They formed a circle around him. They had like charms and a knife. They were about to sacrifice him for money. So he woke up in the middle of that, and then he fought for his life, and then he survived, thankfully. And the boys were arrested. I'm sure that those boys were released very shortly after. All you need to do is bribe those who caught them. I don't want to call the name of any government agency, but everybody knows the agency I'm talking about. They love to receive bribes in this part of the world. So I'm sure those boys are free now, right? The boys who tried to kill their friend. So there's another story that happened, I think 2 years ago, where a boy tried to kill his own mother, and then she fought. Both of them were very, very injured, right? Because he tried to kill her with a knife, and then she fought for her life. She got a hold of the knife. She cut him. He cut her. They both survived. I'm glad the mother survived. I'm not so thrilled that the young man survived. But then he was arrested. There was a case where I think a 10 and a 13-year-old caught another 10-year-old and murdered, just because some witch doctor said they should do that. So now, as I said, these things have always been available. We've always had them, but it wasn't heard of until 2021. It started to resurge again, until today we hear these stories over and over and over and over again.
So not
and
not
all these things. Yeah,
I was just gonna comment. Not much has changed from ancient days because we know with the false god Moloch, they would sacrifice
yeah,
children for good
yeah,
weather, for good crops,
yeah,
which equals what, wealth and prosperity. And so
yeah,
the devil's just playing the same hand, maybe in a different way, and it's always for wealth and money and prosperity seems to be the goal of those who are doing the sacrificing.
yes. So now let me tie it into money. I got caught up with telling the graphic stories that I forgot to tie it into money. So why did this happen when prices started to rise? So inflation has a way of making you poorer. If you have our currency here is called the naira. So if you have 100 naira, and 100 naira can buy you a loaf of bread. If prices rise because the government is inflating the currency, it's and maybe a loaf of bread is 300 naira, right? Um, your wages don't grow as fast as the inflation. That never happens. So um, you still have 100 naira, but you can no longer afford bread. So people can no longer buy the basic things they could buy with the money they had before because the government has inflated the currency. When that happens, people start to get desperate, and desperate people do desperate things. I say about 90% of the population. So about 90% of the population would actually be moved to do evil things, to prostitute themselves, to steal, to murder, to rob, because just to stay alive, just to be alive, right? Maybe about 10% of the population who are God-fearing people would not do that. But I confidently say that at least 90% of human beings will resort to some kind of evil thing to have their needs met. So because of the government's money printing, expanding the money supply, we are getting poorer. And because we are poorer, people would now do anything to survive. Now, how to tie this into Bitcoin? Seeing as Bitcoin in particular has, for some reason, it's not some reason, we all know what the reason is. The demand for Bitcoin is very high, and that gives it very, very high value. There is nothing in the world right now so if the money losing value has the ability to cause this kind of evil, then I don't think now I love cryptocurrencies in general, but Bitcoin and Monero in particular. Monero because of the privacy. However, Bitcoin because of the um, supply cap has the tendency to reverse this problem very quickly. If Nigeria could adopt Bitcoin as its national currency, right? Just imagine that, where people are paid in Bitcoin, people pay taxes in Bitcoin, and just imagine that kind of thing. That would put an absolute end, maybe not an absolute end because people will still be crazy, but that would, just as devaluing the currency, just as having fake money causes all kinds of evil vices. Imagine what having money as good as Bitcoin would do. Bitcoin stands the biggest chance of reversing this madness, this evil. So yeah, Bitcoin.
Yeah, amazing. Well, Econ Bro, we're getting to the end here. Do you want to tell people how they can find you and how they can support your initiatives you're doing in Nigeria?
Oh, okay. So just to talk about what I do, I'm an Austrian economist. So I teach young people all over the country, Austrian economics. So I go from college campus to college campus to university campus, and teaching young people about private property rights, individual responsibility, personal responsibility, individual liberty, private property rights, and most importantly, sound money. So I go around teaching people because these ideas are completely foreign to this part of the world. So I took it upon myself last year to do this, and I've hosted a couple of seminars, have online groups with these people. So I started it, funding it out of my own pocket, but I can't afford to do that forever, and I can't afford to do that indefinitely. At least not at this point in my life. So I set up a fundraiser where I'm trying to raise funds to continue to do this work. So, but you can find me on Twitter at my handle is at Econ Bro, ECON BREAU at ECONBREAU. My DMs are always open. You can talk to me about anything, anytime. If you want to support, I trust Pastor Con would help me post the link to my fundraiser and my Twitter and my Substack, hopefully, in the description. So thank you, and God bless you as you're moved in your heart to support this good work.
Yeah, so wherever you're listening or watching this video or this audio, go into the description and you can find all those links where you can go and support this very, very important work in an area of the world that is famished for this information. Econ Bro is, putting the weight on his own shoulders and setting out to teach these important principles. And so, excuse me, it's very important for us to support him as he does that. So please go into the description, click the links, give. You can give, I think, with fiat and with Bitcoin as well. Go support this work. It's so important. So Econ Bro, again, thank you so much for your time. I know it's late where you are, and it's a little bit, if it's a sacrifice for you to stay up late, and we're appreciative for that. Thank you again for coming on to the Bible and Bitcoin podcast. Until next time, everyone, God bless, grace, and peace.
Thank you for having me. God bless you.
Your family, your nation, and your world needs strong men. The devil wants men weak, emasculated, and addicted to porn. This is why I designed the Slaying the Beast course to help men take back the dominion porn stole from them. This course will help you discover your identity as God's image, how porn leverages and twists that against you, and how with God's help you can turn the tables on the beast and live free. There's also access to a Discord server where you can have fellowship with others in the fight. You do not have to wait any longer to conquer this beast once and for all. Go to lifegiverchurch.net to get started today.